The whispers started before Lyra Chen even stepped through the classroom doors of the Galactic Coalition Academy, and she heard every single one of them as clearly as if they had been shouted directly into her ears. "Another human," someone hissed from the back row, the words dripping with contempt that the speaker did not even try to hide. "How quaint," another voice added, this one belonging to a creature with scales that shimmered like liquid metal under the artificial lights of the station. Lyra kept her face completely neutral as she walked into the massive chamber that served as the lecture hall for advanced combat theory, her boots making soft sounds against the polished floor that seemed to stretch forever in every direction. The Galactic Coalition Academy was not just any school. It was the most elite military training facility in the known universe, accepting only the absolute finest candidates from each of the 47 member species that made up the coalition. Humanity had only been admitted to the coalition 3 standard years ago, which meant that human cadets like Lyra were still regarded as curiosities at best and primitive upstarts at worst by the older member species who had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves and hunting with sharpened sticks. She scanned the room quickly, her dark eyes taking in every detail with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been trained to assess threats since childhood. The seats rose up in curved tiers like the inside of a massive bowl, filled with cadets from a dozen different worlds, some of them vaguely humanoid, others so alien that looking at them too long made her brain hurt as it tried to process shapes that did not exist on Earth. There was only one empty seat in the entire lecture hall, and of course it was in the front row, right next to the biggest and most intimidating cadet in the entire room. His name was Drax Vorenthal, and he was everything that humans were not supposed to be. 8 feet of scaled muscle rose from the seat beside hers, 4 powerful arms ending in claws that looked like they could tear through starship hull plating without much effort. His species was called the Vethkari, and they were one of the founding members of the coalition, a race of warriors who had conquered 3 star systems before humans had even discovered how to make fire. Drax's family lineage stretched back 12 generations of decorated military heroes, each one more celebrated than the last, and he wore that heritage like armor that made him invincible. Lyra walked down the steps toward her seat without hesitation, without slowing down, without showing any sign that the massive predator beside her empty chair affected her in any way whatsoever. She sat down, pulled out her datapad, and prepared to take notes as if this was the most normal thing in the entire galaxy. Drax did not acknowledge her presence at all. He simply sat there like a mountain of scales and contempt, his 4 arms crossed over his massive chest in a display of deliberate dismissal. None of the other cadets acknowledged her either, and Lyra found that she did not mind in the slightest. She had not come here to make friends. The instructor glided into the room a moment later, a silicoid named Malvex whose body was made entirely of living crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbow patterns across the walls. "Today we begin our study of predatory species threat assessment," Malvex announced, their voice resonating through the chamber like wind chimes made of glass, "and we will start with a survey of apex predators from various member worlds." The holoscreen behind the instructor flickered to life, displaying images of terrifying creatures from across the galaxy. Massive beasts with too many teeth, armored monsters that could shrug off plasma fire, nightmare predators that hunted in the void of space itself. Then the screen showed Earth. Lyra watched without expression as images of lions, tigers, bears, and wolves appeared before the class, the deadliest hunters that her homeworld had to offer. Laughter rippled through the lecture hall like a wave. "This is what they consider dangerous." Drax's rumbling voice cut through the amusement, loud enough for everyone to hear. No wonder they needed ships to leave their world. Anything that could be killed by those pathetic creatures clearly could not survive without running away to space. More laughter followed, and Lyra noticed that even some of the species who were not particularly allied with the Vethkari joined in, eager to mock the newcomers who had dared to take seats among their betters. Her fingers did not twitch, her heartbeat did not quicken, and her face remained as calm as still water. She simply filed the comment away in her memory and continued taking notes on her datapad as if nothing had happened. This was a skill that humans had perfected over thousands of years of evolution. The ability to remain calm in the face of danger, to conserve energy, to watch and wait and remember. Because Lyra Chen had learned long ago, through training that would have broken members of most other species, that the first strike in any conflict was rarely the important one. What mattered was the last strike, the one that ended things for good. After the lecture ended, she gathered her belongings and walked out of the room without looking at anyone, without responding to the whispers that followed her like shadows. "Did you see her face?" Someone laughed behind her. She just sat there like prey. "Humans are prey," Drax's voice boomed through the corridor, clearly intended for her to hear. "Their entire species is nothing but prey animals who got lucky and stumbled into technology they do not deserve. Give it a few generations and they will crawl back to whatever mudball spawned them." Lyra kept walking, her pace steady and unhurried. She passed through corridors filled with cadets from species that had been conquering worlds, while humanity was still figuring out agriculture. Past training rooms where warriors practiced combat techniques developed over millions of years of evolution. Past trophy cases displaying the achievements of graduates who had gone on to become legends throughout the galaxy. And she smiled just slightly, where no one could see. They thought she was weak, because she did not respond to their taunts and their mockery. They thought she was afraid because she did not rise to their challenges and their provocations. They thought she was prey because she was small and soft, and lacked the natural weapons that evolution had given to so many other species. But they did not understand humans at all. They did not understand that on Earth, the most dangerous predators were not the ones with the biggest claws or the sharpest teeth. The most dangerous predators on Earth were the ones who could wait. The ones who could watch their prey for days, for weeks, for months if necessary, learning every habit and every weakness and every moment of vulnerability. The ones who did not waste energy on displays of aggression, because they were saving that energy for when it truly mattered. Lyra Chen was not prey. She was a persistence predator from a death world, shaped by 200,000 years of evolution that had turned her species into the most terrifyingly patient hunters the galaxy had ever produced. And Drax Vorenthal had just made himself very, very interesting to her. She would watch him now, watch his patterns, watch his habits, watch for the moment when he overextended himself and created an opening. Because humans did not start fights. Humans finished them. And when the time came, Lyra would finish this one with the cold efficiency that her species had perfected since the days when her ancestors had chased prey across the African savanna, until that prey dropped dead from exhaustion. Patience was the ultimate weapon, and she had more of it than Drax Vorenthal could possibly imagine. 3 weeks passed at the Galactic Coalition Academy, and in that time Drax Vorenthal had made humiliating the human his personal mission in life. It started small at first, a shove in the corridor that he claimed was accidental, a comment about her size that he insisted was just an observation, a laugh at her expense that he said was only harmless fun among classmates. But it grew worse with each passing day. During practical exercises, Drax would accidentally knock her equipment to the floor with one of his 4 massive arms, forcing her to scramble to pick everything up, while the other cadets watched with expressions ranging from amusement to uncomfortable silence. During lectures, he would question her answers with theatrical disbelief, asking how a species that had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel could possibly understand the complexities of galactic warfare. During meals in the massive dining hall, He would tell anyone who would listen that Earth's inclusion in the coalition was nothing more than a political gesture, a participation trophy for a species that had barely mastered the basics of interstellar civilization. The humans are here because the coalition wanted to look generous, he announced one evening to a table full of cadets who hung on his every word. Not because they actually earned their place among us. They are pets, not partners. Lyra sat 3 tables away, eating her meal in silence, her face showing nothing. The other cadets watched her with curious eyes, waiting to see if she would finally react, finally fight back, finally show some sign of the spirit that humans were supposed to possess. She did not give them the satisfaction. Days turned into weeks, and the harassment continued without pause. Drax seemed to take her lack of response as proof that he was right about humans, that they were weak, submissive creatures who would accept any treatment rather than stand up for themselves. He grew bolder with each passing day. One morning, he deliberately stepped on her foot hard enough to leave a bruise, then laughed when she simply walked away without a word. One afternoon, he knocked her datapad out of her hands so hard that it cracked against the wall, and she simply picked up the pieces and left to get a replacement without even looking at him. One evening, he blocked the corridor in front of her with his massive body, forcing her to wait for nearly 10 minutes before he finally moved aside with a mocking bow. Through it all, Lyra remained calm, patient, and utterly unreadable. The Corvani exchange student named Senna finally approached her one night in the common room, her delicate features twisted with confusion and concern. "Why do you not report him to the instructors?" Senna asked in a soft voice, her large eyes blinking rapidly in the way that Corvani did when they were distressed. "What he does to you is clearly against Academy regulations. There are rules about harassment." "Because he has not done anything yet," Lyra replied, not looking up from the combat manual she was studying. "Has not done anything." Senna's voice rose with disbelief. "He insults you daily, he damages your property, he makes your life miserable in front of everyone. How can you say he has not done anything?" "Words are not actions," Lyra said calmly, finally meeting the Corvani's gaze with eyes that held something Senna could not quite identify. Broken equipment can be replaced, bruises heal, and time spent waiting in corridors is time I can use to think. None of those things are worth responding to. "Then what would be worth responding to?" Senna demanded. Lyra smiled, a thin, patient expression that made Senna suddenly uncomfortable in a way she could not explain. "When he acts, I will respond. When he commits to something that cannot be taken back. When he puts himself in a position where retreat is impossible, when he shows me exactly what he is capable of and exactly how far he is willing to go, that is when I will respond." Senna did not understand, and Lyra did not expect her to. The Corvani were a peaceful species, who resolved conflicts through elaborate social rituals that had been developed over millions of years of civilized society. They had never been prey. They had never known what it was like to be hunted by something bigger and faster and stronger, to survive not through superior force, but through patience and cunning, and the willingness to wait for exactly the right moment to strike. Humans had lived that life for 200,000 years. Humans had been hunted by saber-toothed cats and cave bears and wolves that worked in packs, by crocodiles that lurked beneath the water and snakes that hid in the grass and eagles that dove from the sky with talons like daggers. And humans had survived all of that, not by being stronger, not by being faster, not by having bigger teeth or sharper claws, but by being patient. By watching their predators until they understood every pattern, every habit, every weakness. By waiting for the moment when the predator was tired, or distracted, or overconfident. By striking at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right amount of force to end the threat forever. That was what it meant to be human. That was the lesson that 200,000 years of evolution had carved into human DNA deeper than any instinct, deeper than any learned behavior, deeper than any amount of civilization could erase. You do not waste energy on threats that have not committed. You watch, you wait, you learn, and then you end it. Drax Vorenthal did not understand this because he came from a species of apex predators who had never needed to learn patience. The Vethkari had always been the biggest and the strongest and the most dangerous creatures on their world, and they had conquered every challenge through raw power and overwhelming aggression. They did not understand what it meant to be the smaller animal, the weaker animal, the animal that should have lost every single fight but somehow won anyway. But they would learn. Drax would learn. Because every day that passed, Lyra was watching him, watching how he moved, watching how he fought in training exercises, watching how he positioned his forearms when he was angry or confident or scared. She knew now that his left rear arm was slightly weaker than the others due to an old injury. He had never fully rehabilitated. She knew that he telegraphed his strikes by shifting his weight to his right leg a full half-second before he moved. She knew that there was a cluster of nerves at the base of his skull that the Vethkari tried to protect with a collar of thick scales, but that collar had a gap on the left side where the scales did not quite meet. She knew exactly how to hurt him. She knew exactly how to stop him. She knew exactly how to end him if it ever came to that. And she knew it would come to that eventually because Drax was too proud and too confident and too convinced of his own superiority to stop pushing until something pushed back. All she had to do was wait. And humans were very, very good at waiting. Senna left that night without understanding anything about the strange human who refused to fight back against her tormentor, convinced that Lyra was simply too afraid or too weak or too broken to stand up for herself. The other cadets thought the same thing, and their whispers about the pathetic human grew louder with each passing day. Even Drax grew frustrated with her lack of response, and his harassment became more aggressive as he tried to provoke a reaction that would give him an excuse to really hurt her. But Lyra just smiled that thin, patient smile and continued to wait. Because she was not prey. She had never been prey. She was a hunter from a world full of hunters, and she was simply waiting for her prey to make the mistake that all prey eventually made, the mistake of thinking it was safe. The moment Lyra had been waiting for came during a live combat simulation on a cold morning, when the station's artificial sun had not yet reached full brightness. Instructor Malvex had divided the class into pairs for a grappling exercise, non-lethal, fully monitored, standard academy protocol that every cadet was required to complete as part of their training. The rules were simple. Fight until one opponent yielded or was incapacitated, no weapons allowed, no strikes to vital organs, no killing. By what Drax loudly claimed was random selection, but what everyone knew was deliberate manipulation. The Vethkari warrior was paired with the human. Finally, Drax announced to the watching crowd of cadets, his forearms stretching in anticipation as he stepped onto the training mat. I have been waiting for this opportunity since the moment this creature walked into our academy. Lyra stepped onto the mat across from him without a word, her face calm and her body relaxed in a way that made some of the watching cadets shift uncomfortably. Something was different about her today, though none of them could quite identify what it was. "Try not to break, little mammal," Drax growled, dropping into a fighting stance that his species had perfected over millions of years of evolution. "I would hate for this to end too quickly." Instructor Malvex raised one crystalline appendage, their voice ringing through the training hall like a struck bell. "Begin." What happened next would be reviewed by Academy officials 47 times in the following days, and each time they watched the recording they would find something new to analyze. Drax lunged forward with the explosive speed that had made the Vethkari feared across the galaxy, his forearms spread wide to grab the tiny human from multiple angles at once. He expected her to dodge, to scramble backward, to panic like every small creature his ancestors had hunted since the dawn of their species. Lyra did not dodge. She moved into him. Her body flowed forward like water finding cracks in stone, slipping beneath his outstretched arms with a grace that seemed almost impossible for a species without natural flexibility advantages. Her right hand caught his lead wrist and redirected his momentum, using his own weight against him in a way that his combat training had never prepared him for. Her left foot hooked behind his knee at the exact moment her shoulder drove into his center of mass. And suddenly, impossibly, the 8-foot mountain of scales and muscle was falling. His knee collapsed beneath him as her weight leveraged against joints that were not designed to bend that way. 2 of his 4 arms became tangled against his own body, trapped by her positioning in a lock that used his own mass as the anchor. And before he could process what was happening, her elbow drove into the nerve cluster at the base of his skull, right into that gap in his scale collar that she had spent 3 weeks identifying. The strike was calculated with surgical precision, designed to cause maximum pain without permanent damage. It was a courtesy, technically speaking. Drax hit the mat with a sound like falling timber, the impact sending vibrations through the floor that the watching cadets could feel in their bones. For a moment, everything was silent. Then Drax tried to rise, his 4 arms pushing against the mat as rage flooded through his massive body. Lyra let him get halfway up. Then she executed the same sequence from a different angle, faster this time: redirect, collapse, trap, strike. He went down again, gasping for air as his nervous system screamed at him in ways he had never experienced before. His scales flushed with the shock of oxygen deprivation, his vision blurring at the edges as his brain struggled to process what was happening to his body. "Yield," Lyra said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent training hall. Drax roared, a primal sound of fury that came from somewhere deep in his genetic memory, from the countless generations of predators who had never known defeat. He swung wildly with all 4 arms, his claws extended, his training abandoned in favor of raw animal aggression. 3 of his arms came at her like bladed pendulums, each one capable of tearing a human in half with a single swipe. Lyra did not retreat. She broke his wrist on the first arm, a sharp twist that hyperextended the joint beyond its design limits. She dislocated the shoulder on the second arm, her body rotating beneath his guard to apply leverage at an angle his physiology could not resist. The third arm she caught in mid-swing, twisted it back against his own momentum, and used it as a lever to drive his face into the training mat hard enough to crack one of his orbital ridges. The sound was wet and crunching, and several of the watching cadets looked away. His 4th arm, his strongest, the one he had been holding in reserve, came sweeping toward her head with killing force. She simply redirected it into his own thorax, turning his power against him one final time. The impact knocked the remaining air from his lungs and sent shock waves through his internal organs. Drax collapsed and did not get up again. The entire exchange had lasted 11 seconds. Lyra stepped back from the fallen warrior, her breathing controlled, her pulse steady, her face showing the same calm expression she had worn since the moment she walked into the academy 3 weeks ago. Around her, 43 cadets from 12 different species stood in absolute silence, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The tiny human, the prey animal from a primitive world, had just dismantled one of the most decorated cadets in the academy without taking a single hit. "He started it," Lyra said calmly, her voice carrying across the training hall. "I finished it." Instructor Malvex's crystalline form was pulsing with colors that none of the cadets had ever seen before, colors that might have indicated shock or disbelief, or something that the silicoid did not have words for. Medical personnel rushed onto the mat to attend to Drax, who was making sounds that were halfway between moans and whimpers. His wrist was shattered, his shoulder was dislocated, his orbital ridge was fractured, and several of his ribs had been cracked by the force of his own blow redirected against him. He would recover. Humans were not cruel, and Lyra had been very careful to avoid permanent damage, but he would remember this moment for the rest of his life. And so would everyone else who had watched. The cadets parted before Lyra as she walked off the mat, their eyes following her with expressions that ranged from shock to fear to something that might have been the beginning of respect. She did not look at any of them. She did not need to. The message had been delivered, and it was a message that would spread through the academy faster than light could travel through space. Humans were not prey. Humans had never been prey. Humans were persistence predators from a death world, and they had spent 200,000 years learning exactly how to end fights that other species started. And now the galaxy knew it too. The Academy Tribunal convened within 1 hour of Drax Vorenthal being carried off the training mat on a medical stretcher. The chamber where they met was ancient by galactic standards, a circular room with walls of polished obsidian that had witnessed countless judgments over the centuries since the Coalition had been founded. 3 senior instructors sat behind a curved table made of the same dark stone, their expressions ranging from stern to furious to something that might have been reluctant admiration. Instructor Malvex occupied the center seat, their crystalline form still pulsing with agitated colors. To their left sat Commander Threnax of the Velori, a species known for their rigid adherence to rules and protocols. To their right was Senior Instructor Kethais, a Vethkari elder who had been summoned specifically because one of his species had been injured. And floating above the table in a holographic display was Ambassador Vorenthal himself, Drax's father, whose face was twisted with the kind of fury that had launched wars in generations past. Lyra stood before them alone, her hands clasped behind her back in the standard military posture she had been taught on Earth. She had not been allowed to change clothes, and traces of Drax's blood still marked her uniform, a detail that Ambassador Vorenthal had already mentioned 3 times. Cadet Chen, Instructor Malvex began, their voice carefully controlled despite the colors swirling through their form. You were engaged in a controlled exercise with specific parameters designed to prevent serious injury. The force you displayed was, by any reasonable measure, disproportionate to the circumstances. With respect, Instructor, I disagree, Lyra replied, her voice steady and calm. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Humans were not supposed to disagree with their betters. Everyone knew that humans were the newest and weakest members of the Coalition, grateful for whatever crumbs of acceptance they were given. But Lyra showed no sign of gratitude or submission as she stood before the tribunal. The exercise parameters specified grappling until one opponent yielded or was incapacitated, she continued, speaking with the confidence of someone who had memorized every relevant regulation before ever setting foot in the academy. Cadet Vorenthal did not yield despite multiple opportunities to do so. Therefore, I achieved incapacitation, exactly as the rules required. You broke his wrist. Commander Threnax slammed one of his 4 hands against the table, his rigid features contorted with outrage. You dislocated his shoulder and fractured his orbital ridge. You cracked 3 of his ribs. All injuries consistent with a full-contact grappling exercise against an opponent who refused to surrender, Lyra replied without missing a beat. At no point did I use weapons. At no point did I employ techniques prohibited by Academy regulations. And at no point did I apply lethal force even when such force would have been within my capabilities. You expect us to believe that you could have killed him. Ambassador Vorenthal's holographic image flickered with barely contained rage. A human, killing a Vethkari warrior in single combat. I expect you to believe the evidence of your own recording systems, Lyra said, meeting the ambassador's gaze without flinching. Review the footage and you will see that I had multiple opportunities to apply lethal strikes to the throat, to the temples, to the nerve cluster that controls respiration, and I chose not to take any of them. Silence fell over the chamber as the implications of her words sank in. She was not claiming that she had barely won through luck or desperation. She was claiming that she had been in complete control the entire time, that she had chosen exactly how much damage to inflict, and that she had shown mercy by leaving Drax alive. The Vethkari Combat Academy regularly produces graduates with injuries worse than those Cadet Vorenthal sustained, Lyra continued, pressing her advantage. I reviewed the medical records as part of my preparation for this semester. Standard sparring matches among your species result in broken bones, dislocated joints, and fractures at a rate 3 times higher than what occurred today. Senior Instructor Kethais shifted uncomfortably, unable to deny what any student of Vethkari culture would know to be true. Is the tribunal suggesting that humans should be held to a different standard than other species? Lyra asked, her voice still calm but now carrying an edge that made several of the instructors look away. Is the tribunal suggesting that when a human is attacked, she should allow herself to be injured rather than defend herself effectively? She twists our words, Ambassador Vorenthal snarled. This human knew exactly what she was doing. Those strikes were not defensive, they were calculated, they were punitive, they were designed to humiliate my son. Yes, Lyra agreed, they were. The tribunal stared at her in shock. No one had expected her to admit it. Cadet Vorenthal spent 3 weeks establishing a pattern of harassment and intimidation toward me, Lyra continued, her voice never rising above a conversational tone. He damaged my property. He insulted me publicly on a daily basis. He physically assaulted me on multiple occasions in ways that were designed to be just below the threshold of official misconduct. If you had complaints, you should have reported them through proper channels, Commander Threnax interrupted. And what would proper channels have done? Lyra asked, turning to face the Velori directly. Would the Academy have expelled the son of Ambassador Vorenthal based on the word of a human who had been here for only 3 weeks? Would anyone have believed my accusations against a cadet whose family has served the Coalition for 12 generations? The silence that followed answered her question better than any words could have. Cadet Vorenthal chose a combat exercise as the venue for his escalation precisely because he believed his physical advantages made him untouchable. Lyra continued, returning her attention to the full tribunal. He announced his intentions publicly before the match began, in front of 43 witnesses. He said, and I quote, that he had been waiting for this opportunity since the moment I walked into the academy. She paused to let that sink in. He initiated the conflict with full force and aggressive intent. He did not treat this as a training exercise, but as an opportunity to hurt me without consequences. And when I proved to be more capable than he expected, he abandoned all pretense of following the rules and attacked me with claws extended and killing intent. You cannot know his intent, Ambassador Vorenthal protested. I can know that claws extended during a grappling exercise violate Academy regulations, Lyra countered. I can know that the strikes he threw at the end of our match were aimed at vital areas, not grappling targets. And I can know that if I had been the slow, weak, helpless prey animal he believed me to be, I would currently be in the medical bay with injuries far worse than his. She turned to face Ambassador Vorenthal's hologram directly, meeting his furious gaze with eyes that held no fear whatsoever. I responded to initiated aggression with appropriate force, and I ensured that your son understood, truly understood, in a way that words alone could never convey, that future aggression against me would be inadvisable. She paused again, and when she spoke next, her voice carried something that might have been amusement. On Earth, we call this establishing boundaries. I am told it is considered healthy communication. The tribunal deliberated for 6 hours before reaching their verdict. In the end, they ruled in Lyra's favor, narrowly, with extensive documentation, and with a formal note expressing concern about the level of force employed. But they ruled in her favor, because the evidence supported everything she had claimed, and because, deep down, every member of that tribunal knew that she had been right about the impossibility of finding justice through proper channels. And because, perhaps for the first time since humanity had joined the coalition, the older species were beginning to understand that they had seriously underestimated what humans were capable of. The universe was about to learn a very important lesson about the newest members of the galactic community. The tribunal had ruled in Lyra's favor, but the real verdict came in the weeks that followed as the story of what had happened in that training hall spread through the academy like wildfire through dry grass. The whispers about humans changed. They did not become whispers of fear exactly. The other species were too proud to admit that they were afraid of creatures they had dismissed as primitive just weeks before. But they became whispers of something more cautious, more careful, more respectful. Cadets who had laughed at Lyra behind her back now nodded to her when they passed in the corridors. Species who had looked through her, as if she did not exist now, made room for her at tables in the dining hall. Instructors who had questioned whether humans belonged at the academy now called on her first during lectures, curious to hear what perspective a human might offer. And other cadets began sitting near her in class, asking questions, wanting to understand what had happened and how. Senna the Corvani was the first to approach her after the tribunal, her large eyes filled with a mixture of awe and confusion that she did not try to hide. "I owe you an apology," Senna said softly, settling into the seat beside Lyra in the common room. "I thought you were simply accepting the harassment because you were too afraid to fight back. I did not understand what you were actually doing." "Most people do not understand," Lyra replied, looking up from her datapad with a slight smile. "That is part of what makes it effective." "But how did you do it?" Senna pressed, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. "He is twice your size. He has 4 arms instead of your 2. His reflexes are faster than any human could match. His bones are denser and stronger. By every measure that matters in combat, he should have destroyed you without effort." "All of those things are true," Lyra agreed, setting her datapad aside to give Senna her full attention. "He is bigger and stronger and faster than me in every way that his species has evolved to measure strength." "Then how?" Senna demanded. Lyra was quiet for a moment, considering how to explain something that was so fundamental to human nature that most humans never thought about it consciously. "Have you ever heard the term persistence predator?" she finally asked. Senna shook her head. "On Earth, there are many predators that hunt using speed or strength or natural weapons, lions that chase down their prey in short bursts, crocodiles that ambush from beneath the water, spiders that build webs to trap flying insects," Lyra explained. "But humans evolved a different strategy. We became persistence predators." "I do not understand what that means." "It means we hunt by not giving up," Lyra said simply. "Our ancestors did not have claws or fangs or venom. We were not the fastest or the strongest animals on our planet. But we had 2 advantages that no other species on Earth possessed." She held up one finger. "First, we could run for longer than almost any other animal, not faster, but longer. Our bodies evolved to shed heat efficiently and to keep moving when other creatures had to stop and rest. We would chase prey for hours or even days, never letting them escape, never letting them rest, until they simply collapsed from exhaustion." She held up a second finger. "And second, we learned to use our minds to make up for what our bodies lacked. We studied our prey. We learned their patterns. We developed tools and techniques and strategies that turned our weaknesses into strengths." Senna's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. "You were studying Drax," she breathed. All those weeks when he was harassing you, when everyone thought you were just accepting it, you were hunting him. I was learning him, Lyra corrected gently. There is a difference. Hunting implies that I intended to harm him from the beginning. But that was never my goal. I simply wanted to be prepared in case. He escalated to the point where I had no choice but to respond. And he did escalate. He did, and when he did, I was ready. Senna sat back in her chair, processing this new information with the careful deliberation that was characteristic of her species. Your entire species evolved to hunt like this, she finally asked, to watch and wait and prepare and then strike at exactly the right moment. For 200,000 years, Lyra confirmed. That patience is written into our DNA. It is as much a part of what we are as your social rituals are part of what the Corvani are. She smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Senna understand why the other species had started treating humans differently. Drax thought he was the predator because he was big and strong and had claws, Lyra continued. He thought that size and physical power were what mattered in determining who was dangerous and who was prey. But humans learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing in any fight is not the biggest creature. Then what is it? It is the creature that has already decided how the fight will end, Lyra said quietly. The creature that has been preparing for that moment for days or weeks or months. The creature that knows exactly what to do and exactly when to do it because it has watched and waited and planned for every possible scenario. She paused, meeting Senna's eyes with an expression that was calm and gentle, but somehow also terrifying. By the time Drax stepped onto that mat, the fight was already over. He just did not know it yet. Across the academy, in his private recovery chamber, Drax Vorenthal lay on his medical bed and stared at the ceiling with eyes that had not closed for sleep in days. His wrist was in a regeneration cast. His shoulder was immobilized by a gravity field, and his cracked ribs sent spikes of pain through his body every time he breathed. But none of those injuries kept him awake. What kept him awake was the memory of the human's eyes in the moment before she struck. He had expected to see fear in those eyes, the terror of a small creature facing a predator that could tear it apart with barely any effort. He had expected to see desperation, the wild panic of prey that knew it was about to die. He had expected to see anything except what he actually saw. There had been no anger in those eyes, no fear, no hesitation, no uncertainty. Just patience. Calm, calculating, infinite patience. The patience of a species that had evolved to chase its prey across entire continents until that prey dropped dead from exhaustion. The patience of hunters who had learned that the first strike meant nothing, that what mattered was the last strike, the one that ended things forever. For the first time in his life, Drax Vorenthal understood what it meant to be prey. And that understanding was more painful than any of the injuries the human had inflicted on his body. Because he realized now that she could have killed him, easily, efficiently, without any of the mercy she had shown, and he never would have seen it coming. He had walked onto that mat believing that he was in control. He had been wrong. She had been in control from the very first day she walked into the academy, watching him, learning him, waiting for the moment when he would give her an excuse to show everyone what humans were really capable of. And now the entire galaxy was beginning to understand what that meant. The whispers about humans were changing, spreading from the academy to the military fleets, to the diplomatic missions, to the homeworlds of every species in the coalition. Humans were not prey. Humans had never been prey. Humans were the most terrifyingly patient hunters the universe had ever seen, and they had been hiding that truth behind a facade of smallness and weakness and harmless curiosity since the moment they first reached the stars. The galaxy was never going to look at them the same way again. And somewhere in the common room, Lyra Chen smiled her thin, patient smile and returned to her studies. There were still so many lessons left to teach.